Follow the story of a beggar who makes a surprising discovery. A suitcase full of money left behind by a millionaire on the edge of death. What happens next is a true emotional drama. When she reveals what she really wants in exchange for the suitcase, the millionaire's reaction is pure shock and despair. Watch until the end to understand the unexpected twist and the deep impact of this situation. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see more exciting videos like this one. Sophie was a middle-aged woman who lived on the streets of a big city. Her name evoked the image of someone with a life full of challenges, but, at the same time, an almost palpable dignity. If you saw her for the first time, you might think her story was written in the wrinkles of her face and the wear of her clothes. She wore an old jacket, already faded and with several patches, and a skirt that had seen better days. Her shoes were practically a pile of worn-out leather, and each step seemed to echo a lifetime of struggle and endurance. Sophie's face, marked by time and the elements, told a story of hardship. She had an appearance that mixed the strength of someone who had already faced many things with the softness of someone who still believed in human kindness. Her hair, gray and disheveled, fell in uneven strands, but her gaze was intense and full of silent wisdom. Every day, Sophie began her journey before the sun rose. She walked through the streets of the city, where the lights of the buildings and the movement of cars contrasted with her own world of darkness and cold. On every corner, at every park bench, she stopped and approached strangers, begging for alms with a gentle smile and a voice that, though tired, had a note of hope. The city was a place that did not easily welcome her. People rushed past her, often ignoring her pleas for help, and life on the street was relentless. However, Sophie possessed a rare ability to keep her head held high and her spirit intact. Even when she couldn't gather enough for a decent meal, she never failed to show gratitude to anyone who offered something, whether it was a coin or a smile. When she found a place to shelter from the cold, a corner of a building, a park bench, she settled with a mix of resignation and hope. If someone offered her a piece of bread or a cup of coffee, she received it with a genuine smile, as if every small offering was a great treasure. The truth is, behind that face of resignation, there was a woman with a big heart and an inner strength that defied adversity. Sophie was not just a beggar. She was an informal caretaker of those around her. Whenever she saw others in difficult situations, she shared what she had, even if it was little. If she came across a young mother with a small child, Sophie didn't hesitate to offer her a portion of what she could collect, often sacrificing her own need to eat. Sophie's dignity manifested in the way she treated others, as if she never wanted anyone to feel pity for her. She spoke to people with serene grace and had a special way of listening, as if every story she heard was the most important one in the world. And although life constantly tested her, she continued with an indomitable spirit, always believing that someday things could change, if not for her, then for others like her. This was Sophie's life, a continuous cycle of survival and generosity, where each day was a new challenge and a new opportunity to spread a little kindness in the world. She walked the city streets with the hope of a better tomorrow, keeping alive the belief that somewhere, perhaps, there was an opportunity for transformation, a stroke of luck that could alter her fate. On a cold, rainy morning, the city seemed wrapped in a gray cloak. The sky was filled with heavy clouds, which unleashed constant rains, creating puddles in the streets. The biting wind made the few passers-by flee in search of shelter from the relentless elements. That day, the air was thick and the cold penetrated to the bone, making the city even more unforgiving. Sophie, as always, sought shelter in one of the alleys she knew well. The alley was one of those hidden places where the constant traffic of people rarely arrived. It was a narrow, damp space, surrounded by brick walls covered in graffiti and dirt. In a corner of this alley, she usually sheltered from the rain, trying to protect herself from the moisture that ached her bones. That morning, as she carefully moved between the debris and splashed through puddles, Sophie saw something unusual. There was a suitcase lying, apparently at random, abandoned and almost invisible among the dirt. The suitcase was partially buried in the mud, and the clay seemed to have accumulated around it, as if the rain had slowly buried it over time. The suitcase was large, made of dark leather, and covered with stains and dirt. Its handles were dirty and worn, and the rigid frame seemed to have been damaged by time and the elements. However, even covered in mud, there was something intriguing about the way the suitcase was placed. It didn't seem like an ordinary suitcase, but something that had been left there with a purpose. Perhaps chance or luck had led it there, but something in her instinct told her that this suitcase had a special meaning. Driven by curiosity, Sophie cautiously approached. Her fingers, despite trembling from the cold, found the handle of the suitcase and pulled it gently. The mud clung to the surface, but the suitcase moved with a weight that made her stop for a moment. It was a dense weight, which suggested that there was something substantial inside. When Sophie finally managed to open the suitcase, her eyes widened in total astonishment. What she found there was something she could never have imagined. The suitcase, which had been hidden and forgotten under a layer of mud and dirt, was full of bills, piles and piles of money, meticulously stacked and arranged in bundles that gleamed even in the dim, cloudy light of the alley. Each bill seemed newer than the ones she had seen before. They were notes in large quantities, much larger than anything Sophie had ever touched. The money was neatly packed, wrapped in elastic bands, and protected as if it were a precious cargo. The contrast between the inside of the suitcase, so clean and orderly, and the dirty, neglected exterior couldn't have been more striking. Sophie's eyes shone with a light of hope and disbelief. A part of her was euphoric, imagining the possibilities of a different life, a life where the daily worries about food and shelter could transform into something more stable and secure. She could imagine a future where she could find a home, a job, and perhaps even help others in similar situations to hers. However, as the excitement began to take hold of her, a feeling of unease also arose. The origin of that money was an absolute mystery. What was such a huge amount doing there, hidden in an old suitcase abandoned in an alley? Sophie's first reaction was astonishment, but it was soon accompanied by a disturbing thought. Who would be the owner of this money? And why would it be there, so easily accessible? The feeling of distrust was palpable. Sophie knew that a fortune of that magnitude didn't appear without reason. The money could have a dark origin, be related to something dangerous or illegal. And despite her need and desire for a better future, she couldn't ignore the possibility that this money might bring problems and complications instead of solutions. As the rain continued to fall and the wind blew in the distance, Sophie stood there, contemplating the suitcase and its contents. The sound of raindrops falling and hitting the ground around her was the only soundtrack to that moment of deep reflection. She sat beside her suitcase, her mind restless and full of unanswered questions. What to do with this money? How to ensure that her discovery didn't lead to bigger problems? Her thoughts revolved around the options she had before her. She could take the money and try to start a new life, but was that the right choice? What if the money belonged to someone who was desperately looking for it? There was also the moral dilemma. Using that money without knowing the truth about its origin could make her feel guilty or responsible for problems she didn't yet fully understand. Sophie's inner conflict was evident. The possibility of transforming her life was tempting, but the uncertainty and fear of the unknown were equally intense. She knew she needed to do something, but what exactly was the next step? With a sense of weight on her shoulders, she decided she needed to seek more information, to better understand the situation, and, above all, to act carefully to avoid falling into any trap that might be hidden among those piles of money. The millionaire in question was an elderly and influential man named Charles Harrington. Charles was a respected name in social and business circles. With an illustrious career, he had built a business empire that spanned from large properties to international investments. His image was that of a successful man, with a life full of achievements and luxuries that few could imagine. However, behind the facade of power and wealth, Charles faced a very personal and silent battle. At 78 years old, Charles Harrington was in critical condition. His once vigorous and strong health had been undermined by a rapidly advancing terminal illness. The doctors had given him a grim diagnosis. Time was running out, and his options were limited. Facing the inevitability of the end, Charles found himself grappling with a deep sense of regret and despair. During the last weeks of his life, Charles delved into deep reflection about the legacy he would leave behind. Although he had amassed an impressive fortune, the thought that his wealth might ultimately only benefit himself without having a lasting or positive impact on the world around him troubled him. In moments of introspection, he wondered if his life, so focused on accumulating wealth, had truly made a significant difference. Thus, the idea of a final gesture emerged, an act of remorse and redemption. Charles decided that instead of leaving his fortune to distant heirs or institutions that might not fully grasp what was needed, he would find a way to identify someone worthy, someone who could turn that money into something truly meaningful. It was a desire that came from deep within, an attempt to right the wrongs of a life spent accumulating material goods. He made the decision to hide a significant portion of his fortune in a suitcase, leaving it in a place where it could somehow be found. The suitcase, carefully prepared and filled with large sums of money, was placed with the hope that it would be discovered by someone who not only needed it, but could also use the money for a greater good. It was a test of character, a final attempt to make a difference in the world. As Charles spent his last days in a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses fighting to ease his suffering, he carried with him the hope that his last effort would not be in vain. His thoughts were focused on the future, wondering if this gesture might somehow lead to a positive outcome. He knew there was a possibility the suitcase might never be found, or might end up in the wrong hands. But the thought of trying was preferable to letting his fortune disappear into the void of a life without purpose. The expectation that someone like Sophie, someone whose life had been filled with challenges yet paradoxically retained an unshakable kindness, might find the suitcase and give new meaning to that money, was a thought that brought him some comfort in his final hours. Charles Harrington could not have predicted the details of what would happen after his death, but in his last moments, he did what he could to try to turn his own journey and mistakes into something that could benefit another person in a true and lasting way. His desire was that, ultimately, his wealth might be used to make a difference, and that his story would be more than just a chronicle of material success, but a legacy of hope and humanity. Sophie, with the suitcase full of money beside her, found herself in a whirlwind of emotions. The shine of the fortune before her eyes clouded her clear vision. Her mind was torn between the excitement of a possible change in her life and the moral responsibility to understand the origin of that money. Despite her desperate need, she felt that there was something deeper at play. The money, in some way, seemed to carry a moral and emotional weight that she couldn't ignore. With hands still trembling and her heart racing, Sophie made a difficult and courageous decision. She couldn't simply take the money and disappear with it, despite her desperate situation. Something inside her, a voice that came from her own ethics and integrity, told her that she needed to discover the truth behind this fortune. There was an undeniable sense that the money's fate was tied to a greater purpose, something she didn't yet fully understand. With this determination, Sophie knew she had to act quickly. The first thing she did was find a safe place to hide the suitcase while she searched for more information. She found a small temporary shelter where she hid the suitcase in a corner, knowing it would be relatively protected. Her next step was to find someone who could help her understand the situation and somehow connect her with the origin of the money. Sophie made her way to the hospital where Charles Harrington was admitted. a place just a few kilometers from the alley where she had found the suitcase. The journey was exhausting and full of challenges. The rain had ceased, but the cold still lingered, and Sophie braved the biting wind as she made her way to the hospital. She walked with a determined step, but also with some apprehension. The idea of meeting someone so influential and yet so close to the end of his life was intimidating. Upon arriving at the hospital, Sophie had to deal with the formality and bureaucracy of the environment. Receptionists and nurses were busy with the constant flow of patients and visitors. Sophie, with her worn-out clothes and tired appearance, drew the attention of the staff, who initially looked at her with suspicion. She explained that she needed to speak with someone about an urgent matter and was willing to go through any necessary process to find the person who could help her. After some persistence, Sophie managed to be directed to the hospital's administration department. There, they advised her to seek the person in charge of coordinating visits and information for critical patients. With the help of a staff member who seemed to recognize the gravity of her situation, Sophie was taken to a more private area where she could explain her story. As she explained her situation to the hospital coordinator, Sophie found herself sharing the discovery of the suitcase and her desire to understand its origin. The coordinator, surprised by the revelation, helped her connect with Charles Harrington's lawyer, who was handling Charles's legal affairs and legacy. The lawyer, a serious and austere-looking man, listened intently to Sophie's account. He was visibly surprised to hear the description of the suitcase and the money. It was clear to him that the situation was complex and needed to be handled carefully. After verifying the authenticity of Sophie's story and confirming the details, he began to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. With the lawyer's help, Sophie was finally able to meet Charles Harrington himself, who was in a private room, surrounded by medical equipment and palliative care staff. Charles was weak and frail, but still possessed a remarkable presence of mind and clarity. Sophie, nervous but determined, entered the room with the lawyer by her side. Sophie entered, her hesitant steps echoing faintly on the linoleum floor. Charles's lawyer, present in the room to ensure everything went according to plan, watched with interest. When Charles saw Sophie, he tried to sit up slightly, although his movements were slow and weary. With a slightly trembling but sincere voice, Sophie introduced herself. "Mr. Harrington, my name is Sophie. I found the suitcase. The suitcase with the money. I'm here to talk to you about it." Charles, who had initially been in a state of confusion, frowned as he heard Sophie's words. He looked at her with an expression of disbelief, as if he were trying to process the reality of his situation and her statement at the same time. His eyes lit up with a spark of recognition and hope as her words began to sink into his mind. The lawyer, realizing the gravity of the moment, stepped forward and began explaining the situation to Charles, confirming what Sophie had said. The conversation between them was brief, but filled with emotion and urgency. Charles, even in his weakened state, managed to understand the gravity of the situation. He struggled to sit up a little more, his movements slow and laborious, but his voice was firm and filled with a calm resignation. "So, you found the suitcase, and you're here to tell me about it." Sophie, still trembling, nodded affirmatively. "Yes, I found the suitcase in an alley. I didn't know what to do, but then I decided I needed to talk to you and understand what to do next." Charles closed his eyes for a moment, as if reflecting on everything that had happened. His thoughts were clearly focused on what that money meant and how it could finally find the purpose he had hoped for before his departure. The feelings of remorse and the desire to leave a positive legacy now mixed with a sense of relief and hope. The lawyer, observing the interaction, gestured to Sophie to approach the bed, allowing her and Charles to speak more closely. Charles spoke in a low voice, but with a clarity that belied his physical weakness. "I left that money, hoping it would find someone who could use it for good. My intention was to find someone who not only needed it, but could also transform that fortune into something that would benefit others. Sophie listened intently, absorbing every word. She realized the depth of Charles's mission and understood that she had now been entrusted with a very important role. Her decision to come forward to Charles, rather than simply keeping the money, was proving to be the right choice. The money, now imbued with a greater purpose, was not just a solution to her problems, but an instrument for meaningful change. Charles Harrington, lying in his hospital bed, was visibly exhausted, but his mind remained alert and clear. He knew the moment was crucial, and that Sophie's proposal could be the culmination of his journey of regret and redemption. The air in the room seemed to carry a palpable tension as he awaited Sophie's response. The woman who now held such an important part of his legacy in her hands. Charles's lawyer stood nearby, wearing an expression of expectation mixed with curiosity, eager to see how this meeting would unfold. With visible effort, Charles adjusted his posture and looked at Sophie, prepared to offer her anything she asked for in exchange for the money. His offer was sincere. He wanted to repay her for the chance she had given him to correct a wrong and leave behind a positive legacy. Sophie, on the other hand, was heartbroken, fully aware of the weight of the decision she was about to make. The money, an impressive fortune, was right in front of her, but the thought of simply taking it for herself seemed to contradict the very purpose of Charles's gesture. Rather than asking for something material or monetary for herself, Sophie felt there was an opportunity to create something bigger, something that could positively impact the lives of many others. With a firm but emotional voice, Sophie made her request. "Mr. Harrington, I don't want the money for myself. Instead, I ask you to use this fortune to create a relief fund for the homeless. For those of us who live on the streets, this money could make a huge difference. If you could establish an organization that helps people like me find shelter, food, and opportunities to change their lives, that would be the greatest gift you could give." When Sophie made her request to Charles Harrington, the silence that followed was filled with almost palpable tension. Charles, lying in his hospital bed, seemed to be in deep contemplation. His eyes, which until that moment had reflected the fragility of his physical state, began to shine with an unexpected emotional intensity. Sophie's request was not what he had imagined. Instead of a personal desire for wealth or material possessions, she had asked him to use the money to create a relief fund for the homeless. The impact of Sophie's request was immediate and profound. Charles, who had spent most of his life accumulating wealth and looking after his own interests, now faced the pure generosity of a request that transcended any personal desire. His eyes, already tired and swollen from illness, began to fill with tears. It was a reaction that reflected both the shock and the deep admiration he felt for Sophie and her request. He looked at her with a mix of surprise and emotion, as if trying to absorb the magnitude of what he had just heard. The idea of using his fortune to create a relief fund, something that would directly impact the lives of people like Sophie, was a proposal he had never considered in his entire life. Charles had always thought of charity in a general sense, through donations and institutions, but had never contemplated such a personal and direct gesture. Tears began to roll down Charles's face, a manifestation of his deep emotion. He felt a mixture of regret for not having thought of something so significant earlier, and unexpected gratitude for having the opportunity to do something truly transformative. He extended a trembling hand and took Sophie's, a gesture that, despite his weakness, had profound meaning. I don't know how to express how moved I am by your request," said Charles, his voice trembling, not only from physical weakness, but from the intensity of his emotions. "I thought I would find someone who only wanted the fortune for themselves. I never imagined that someone would seize an opportunity like this to do good in such a personal and selfless way." Charles paused and wiped away a tear that ran down his cheek. He looked up at the ceiling, as if trying to find a way to express the depth of what he was feeling. "I've always wanted to leave a legacy, but I never thought it could be something so significant and immediate. Your proposal shows me that true wealth is not in money itself, but in the impact we can have on people's lives." The lawyer standing beside Charles watched with an expression of deep admiration and respect. He knew this moment was crucial and began taking detailed notes to ensure that Charles and Sophie's wishes would come to fruition. Their conversation was transforming Charles's vision of what it meant to leave a legacy, and Sophie's role in that process was undeniable. Seeing Charles's reaction, Sophie felt a wave of empathy and gratitude. She had hoped to touch someone's life with her request, but she had not expected such an emotional and genuine response. The moment was intense, filled with a deep sense of fulfillment and human connection. "Mr. Harrington," Sophie said in a soft and reassuring tone, "there's no need to worry about words. What you are willing to do is more than I could have imagined. The chance to help others, to make a real difference, is a gift that no one can measure. I'm so grateful for your willingness to listen and respond so generously." Charles smiled, though his strength was clearly fading. His smile was an expression of relief and satisfaction, knowing that despite the limitations imposed by his condition, he had found a way to leave a lasting impact. He gestured to his lawyer, who immediately began preparing the necessary documents and directives to establish the foundation that would fulfill Sophie's wish. From that moment on, the hospital room, once marked by suffering and uncertainty, became a place of hope and transformation. Charles was determined to use his remaining moments of clarity to ensure that his fortune would be channeled into a greater purpose, something that truly reflected the kindness and compassion he now understood on a deeper level. Even in his weakened state, Charles began working with renewed vigor. The process wasn't easy. He faced the fragility of his health and the pressure of limited time. But the desire to leave a meaningful legacy, something that would truly make a difference, gave him new energy. He knew he needed to create something more substantial than a simple relief fund. He wanted his foundation to not only address immediate crises, but also tackle long-term social issues he had often overlooked. With the support of his lawyer and a team of consultants, Charles began meticulously planning the foundation. The hospital room, once a place of sadness and resignation, transformed into a hub of frantic activity. Legal documents were discussed, bylaws were drafted, and initial ideas about how the foundation should operate were laid out. The air was filled with a sense of purpose and urgency. Charles decided to name the foundation Hope and Future, a name that reflected his desire to provide not only immediate assistance, but also long-term opportunities for a better life. He envisioned a foundation that offered more than just shelter and food. He wanted it to create rehabilitation programs, job training, and psychological support for the homeless. The vision was of an organization that addressed the root causes of poverty and social exclusion. In frequent meetings with his team, Charles discussed his ideas for the foundation. He emphasized the importance of forming partnerships with other nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, and local businesses. The goal was to create a support network that would provide a true stepping stone for people to get off the streets and rebuild their lives. Charles also included plans to support other social causes he had neglected over the years. He wanted the foundation to be involved in educational projects for underprivileged children, promoting equal opportunities and access to quality education. Another area of focus was mental health, a crucial but often overlooked aspect of recovery and long-term stability. The work of creating the foundation became a true mission for Charles. He constantly reviewed the details, ensuring that every aspect of the planning was carefully considered. Though his health continued to decline, he was determined to see his vision come to life. Every decision was made with the awareness that this would be the final legacy of his life. Sophie, observing the progress, felt deep gratitude and admiration for Charles. She visited him periodically, and each meeting was marked by discussions about the future of the foundation and the impact it could have. Charles and Sophie shared moments of reflection, hope, and planning. Their connection deepened, based on a mutual understanding of the desire to transform lives and create a lasting impact. Finally, the day came when the Hope and Future Foundation was officially established. Charles, despite his fragile condition, attended the launch ceremony with a sense of accomplishment and peace. The event was modest but full of meaning. Representatives from various organizations and partners of the new foundation were present, witnessing the beginning of an initiative that promised to transform lives and address important social issues. The foundation's support included a rehabilitation program that offered job training and psychological assistance. Sophie enrolled in a training course that provided her with new skills and a real employment opportunity. At the same time, she benefited from a mental health program that helped her cope with the trauma and hardships she had faced over the years. Additionally, the foundation had a broader impact. Other homeless individuals began to benefit from the programs and opportunities it created. Many received help in finding shelter and employment, and numerous community projects started to flourish, bringing hope and improvements to poverty-stricken areas. The Hope and Future Foundation, created with the money from the Suitcase, quickly became more than just a simple project. It transformed into a vibrant symbol of hope and change. The impact of this legacy was profound and far-reaching, marking a true revolution in the lives of thousands of people and inspiring a movement of generosity and solidarity that resonated throughout the community. From the moment it was launched, the foundation captured the imagination and hearts of the people. The initial gesture by Charles Harrington, which began as an act of desperation and remorse, evolved into a large-scale movement that touched lives in a tangible and meaningful way. The foundation became a beacon of hope in an era often marked by indifference and inequality. The foundation's headquarters, located in a welcoming and accessible building in the city center, was a hub of constant activity. The walls were adorned with pictures of people benefiting from the programs and inspiring messages about the foundation's impact. The atmosphere was vibrant and optimistic, reflecting the spirit of change that the foundation promoted. Teams of volunteers and staff worked tirelessly to ensure that every aspect of the programs was well executed, from immediate assistance to long-term initiatives. The foundation offered various programs addressing the fundamental needs of the homeless and low-income individuals. Shelters were established in strategic areas, providing not only a safe roof, but also a space where beneficiaries could feel respected and valued. Each shelter was more than just a refuge. It was a place of transformation, offering access to nutritious meals, basic health care, and most importantly, the opportunity to regain dignity. The foundation's rehabilitation program was one of its greatest successes. It provided professional training in various fields, from technical skills to customer service. People who had previously struggled to find a way out of homelessness now had the opportunity to acquire new skills and enter the job market. The support didn't stop with training. The foundation also helped with job placement and provided ongoing support to ensure that individuals could retain their new jobs and thrive in their new lives. Furthermore, the foundation promoted educational programs aimed at children and youth from needy families. Schools and learning centers were established, offering quality education and extracurricular activities that encourage personal and academic growth. Scholarships and educational support helped create opportunities for these children and young people to reach their full potential, breaking the cycle of poverty and opening doors to a promising future. The foundation also created a mental health program that addressed an often overlooked area. Psychologists and counselors were available to provide emotional support and therapy to people facing trauma and psychological difficulties. Mental health was treated with the seriousness it deserved, recognizing that recovery and stability could only be achieved when emotional needs were also met. As positive results began to accumulate, the Hope and Future Foundation became a source of inspiration. not only for those who benefited directly, but also for the broader community. Stories of transformation and success started to appear in the media, showing how lives were deeply and lastingly changed. These stories became powerful examples of how one act of generosity could trigger a cycle of positivity and change. The foundation's impact inspired others to get involved. Individuals and companies, moved by the mission of hope and future, began making their own contributions and participating in volunteer projects. The foundation became a catalyst for a wave of solidarity, demonstrating that when people come together with a common purpose, they can create real and meaningful change. Although physically absent, Charles Harrington left a legacy that resonated in every corner of the foundation. His desire to turn his fortune into a benefit for others was realized in ways he could never have fully imagined. The foundation was not just a reflection of his final intentions, but a celebration of the impact that generosity can have. After her transformation, Sophie found a new purpose in life. Now, with a more stable and secure position, she never forgot the pivotal moment that changed her destiny, and that of so many others. The memory of Charles Harrington and the impact of the foundation he created were etched into her heart, guiding her actions and decisions. She began actively engaging in several community initiatives, using her own experiences to motivate and support those facing similar challenges. Sophie became a passionate advocate for the rights and well-being of the disadvantaged. She frequently participated in fundraising events, conferences, and community forums, sharing her story and highlighting the importance of mutual help and social involvement. In addition, Sophie created her own community project, inspired by the Hope and Future Foundation. The project focused on providing support to homeless individuals and families facing economic difficulties, offering not only immediate assistance, but also training programs and employment opportunities. Sophie used her experience to guide and support participants, helping them find their path to a better life. Her design was an extension of Charles's legacy and reflected her commitment to change and hope. Sophie and Charles's story soon became a local legend, an inspirational tale often shared in schools, churches, and community centers. People heard about the beggar who found a suitcase of money and, instead of using the wealth for personal gain, asked that it be used to help those in need. The generosity of Charles and Sophie's selfless response became a powerful example of the positive impact that a single act of kindness can have. Local media covered inspiring stories of how the foundation and Sophie's community project transformed lives. News began to circulate about people who found jobs, children who received quality education, and families who managed to escape poverty, reinforcing the importance of empathy and mutual support. The memory of Charles and Sophie's dedication continued to resonate in the community, encouraging others to get involved and make a difference. Sophie also created a small memorial center in honor of Charles, which served as a space for reflection and learning about the power of generosity. The center displayed photographs, stories, and articles about the foundation's impact and Charles's legacy. It was a place where people could be inspired and reminded of the difference one act of kindness could make. The story of Sophie and Charles was a powerful and ongoing reminder that even in the most unexpected and challenging situations, true wealth does not lie solely in money or material possessions, but in the ability to touch others' lives with kindness and generosity. Sophie's transformation and the lasting impact of the foundation showed that true change comes from the heart and the desire to help others. In every act of kindness and every life changed, the legacy of Charles Harrington and the spirit of Sophie endured. The foundation and the community project were not just symbols of hope, but living examples of how empathy and altruism can create a fairer and more supportive world. The story, told over and over again, served as continuous inspiration, reminding everyone that true wealth lies in generosity and the ability to make a difference in others' lives. Thus, the message of Sophie and Charles, immortalized through their actions and the impact of their story, continues to inspire and light the way for many. She is a testament to how, even in the darkest times, kindness and the desire to help others can transform lives and create a lasting legacy of hope and change. Sophie and Charles's story is much more than a tale of community success. It is a profound lesson about the true meaning of wealth and the lasting impact of generosity. Throughout their lives, both exemplified how empathy and altruism are not just admirable virtues, but powerful forces that can shape communities and transform lives.